A handful in our audience. We appreciate you being here. For the record, it is Tuesday, March 11th. This is the joint meeting of Meridian City Council and the Meridian Development Corporation. We started very late. It's 6:37. And Mr. Clerk, I'll ask you to call roll.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. For the Meridian City Council, Councilmember Milam.
Here.
Councilmember Burnt.
Here.
Councilmember Palmer.
Here.
Councilmember Little Roberts.
Here.
Councilmember Cavanagh.
Here.
Councilmember Borton.
Here.
Mayor DeVeard.
Here. Ashley, would you like to call roll for MDC?
For Meridian Development Corporation Board, Dan Baslon.
Here.
Nathan Mueller.
Here.
Keith Bird.
Here.
Mayor DeVeard.
Here.
Dave Winder.
Here.
Rob McCarville.
Here.
Rick Ritter.
Here.
Diane Bevan.
Here.
Steve Vlasic.
Here.
Council Lakey. And I am here as well.
And thank you all for joining us. This is a great 100% turnout. Awesome.
Great.
Item number 2 is adoption of the agenda.
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Borton.
move that we adopt the agenda as published.
Second.
I have a motion and second to adopt the agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All ayes. Item 3 is the Zamzows mural update. I did see Hillary. There you go.
I don't even know how to address you all now. All right, Madam Mayor, members of the council, members of MDC, the Zamzows family and Sector 17 have been working on numerous versions of a design for the Zamzows mural, and this design was approved by the Zamzows, I think it was just last week. So we wanted to give you all the opportunity to see where the design currently stands, get any of your input, but I did want to let you know that MAC is having a special meeting on the 21st of March to determine their formal recommendation to you. But if you have suggestions, comments, or feedback that you would like to supply prior to hearing MAC's recommendation, this is the opportunity to have you both together as the authorizing boards to discuss.
Thank you, Hillary. And we did want to make sure, since we had everyone together, that you had a chance to hear what the other body might say. It does need to go to the commission first, but this was an opportunity to share your thoughts as one.
Madam Mayor,
Ms. Little Roberts.
I am so not artistic, so if I'm just missing it, please let me know. But could you give us a hint on the blank spaces?
Oh, these blank spaces are windows and doors that are a part of the building. So as far as signs go, do you want me to pass this around?
I was going to say, they have something to do about farming and, no.
Sponsors.
There are some signs on the building currently, and the artists said that they would be happy to work around those signs, and then Zamzows said they'd be happy to move the signs. So everyone's really flexible as far as those go, but a lot of these are built-in windows, and then the thing in the bottom center is their door that slides open.
Okay.
So if that helps give you a reference.
It's a good question.
Madam
That's a
Mayor,
great question.
Ms. Milam.
Hillary, so is it planned, they're planning on doing it in gray?
No.
Or is it going to be in color? Because I'm having a hard time envisioning it.
Yeah, it will definitely be in color. This is just, like I said, the approved design from the Zamzows family. The artists have been creating design after design to help make modifications that would fit the needs of both generations of the Zamzows family. So we have this updated design with their approval that we wanted to share. And then the colors that would be integrated would be colors that would reflect some of the MDC branding. So there's some of those oranges and rich blues and yellows that would be integrated in this as well.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Cavanagh.
Hillary is one who's just kind of got caught up to date on this project in the past week or so. Can you give me a little bit of background about what type of direction was kind of provided to the Zamzows family? I am so proud of our ag history in this community. that's just such a unique canvas, and I think a really unique opportunity to do something different. And I just didn't know if the direction was we wanted to do something very ag-related because it's the Zamzows family. Just get me caught up to speed on how we ended with this.
So there was a definite desire from the Zamzows family to have there be an agricultural theme as well. There were previous versions that kind of had some more abstracted elements, and the Zamzows family tended to the more realistic and the more linear, which I think we also kind of heard at one of the MDC meetings. Someone had said that they were interested in it being pretty realistic. So this artist group is also really good at making things look very realistic in their shading and use of color. So it was very much kind of that drive from the Zamzows family that gave it that pastoral and linear feel rather than, like something other. The cows really stands out to you, but most of it's pretty flat surface. And that was something that was the direction from Faye and Jim, it sounds like. And then there were lots of conversations like we should add a cat, we're a cat family. We should have a red barn, so that barn will probably be red because that's something that's important to them and their family. And that's the way of representing them without necessarily putting, Grandma Z's face on the side of a building really big.
Okay, any other comments, questions? Mr. Bessalone.
Hillary, what is the timeline for possible completion date?
So the artists are really eager to get started sooner rather than later, so they're hoping to get it done this spring. Basically, my plan is to get some type of recommendation from the Arts Commission. If they're in favor, it could go as quickly as going to MDC on the 28th, City Council on the 3rd, and then having the artists probably start in April. And they said the installation time itself would be about 2 weeks.
Mr. Bessalone, can you talk into the microphone?
So possibly by summer,
Yes.
we would have it?
Yeah. That's great. That's the goal. Their original goal was to have it done by March, but there were so many design revisions that it got pushed back a bit.
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Kavner.
as it's been well established, I am not a authority on art by any means, but I just some feedback maybe to pass along to MAC and to MDC and the City Council here. We're a community of young families. We have kids in everything that we do. And if it's possible to incorporate a couple of kids, at least I think that's also representative of what our community has become, which is a place that's focused on youth.
You're riding the cow.
I rode a lot of cows when I was a kid.
I would climb a lot of fences.
Okay, anything further?
Yeah, you could have two little kids sitting on the fence line.
Yeah, there's something.
Okay, if not, thank you, Hillary. We appreciate you being here. Item 4 is Main and Broadway project update. Mr. Lakey.
That one.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. I guess I'll kind of start this discussion, and if the MDC board members can humor me a little bit, I'm going to go over some of the history that they're all familiar with. This is more for the City Council's benefit. And what I'm going to talk about particularly are the history of the process that MDC's been through, particularly with 703 and 713, the two buildings just over here, and then kind of where we are now, and then the broader policy and where to go from here is up to you as policymakers. So going back to early 2017, MDC put out an RFP for those two buildings. And Mr. Josh Evarts and November Whiskey was the only response that we received, but it was a good one. And the board approved and selected his proposal, and we entered into a development agreement with Josh and November Whiskey. That development agreement essentially comes in two phases, but I want to start back before that. Before we enter the development agreement, the Urban Renewal Agency has the ability to put things like deed restrictions and rights of reversion in contracts. But we talked about that, and although MDC has the ability to do it, those that are providing financing for the project and title insurance to the project don't really like those things. So we didn't include rights of reversion in the properties or deed restrictions. We simply addressed those things in the contract. So when I say rights of reversion, that means if the project doesn't move forward or there's a violation of the agreement, that it automatically comes back to MDC. It doesn't. What we built into that was what's called liquidated damages and specific performance, that if it didn't happen and there was a monetary amount that would help compensate MDC for the property that was transferred to Josh and November Whiskey. So as part of that development agreement, the 703 property, the old bank building, was transferred to November Whiskey. And that's Mr. Evart's company. And that development of that site was essentially phase 1, and then phase 2 would be the old bank building where the Unbound library is now. And they were kind of tied together. As things went along and time went along, with the increase in building and everything, construction costs kind of went through the roof. And as Josh was going through it and looking at the numbers, realized that just phase 1 by itself didn't pencil. So was very, Josh has been very upfront with the MDC board, came and told him phase 1 doesn't pencil. It looks like phase 1 and 2 could pencil. So started going down that road. But then as he started exploring that and MDC was talking about that, I think everybody looked at a larger vision being the best approach. And that larger vision being, okay, those 2 buildings and what part of the rest of the block could be developed as part of this project. And Josh got Caleb Roop involved from the Pacific companies, and we started having those discussions about the larger block. Then there was discussion about the old city hall, and that was a big question, a big unknown. It wasn't included initially in the planning and the discussions initially, but our board thought there was potential there. The challenge the city had, obviously, that you know about, was the litigation with Ada County and the unknown as to whether you had to do a courthouse or not and how all that was going to shake out. But there was interest in exploring whether the potential for the old city hall was even possible, even in the realm of consideration. And we talked about, if so, how would that proceed? MDC would not have to go through another request for proposal process, because we already did that with 703 and 713, and the rest of the properties, excluding the old city hall, would be private. Caleb Roop and the Pacific companies teaming up with Josh to develop the larger site. So we wouldn't need to go through an RFP, but if the old city hall was included, if that ultimately came to MDC, then that would require some RFP process because it hadn't been included in one before. So as a result of that, with that potential in the mix, we moved forward with a meeting with city staff and the mayor and some of the MDC folks and MDC staff to talk about that potential for the old city hall. I would also say that during this time, the development agreement has a larger term to it, and then it has some internal timelines within it. And I think some of the communication that we had from the city, there was confusion about what those timelines were and the fact that we don't have a right of reversion. So what we ended up doing with November Whiskey was extending some of the internal timelines, which related to getting plans submitted to the city, getting a demolition permit, actually demolishing the building. As part of those discussions the board was having, initially they were talking about let's get the building knocked down as quick as we can and get things going. Ultimately they changed that to say, well, if we're looking at a larger vision, don't knock the building down because it is still an asset. It's in need of some work, but it's not falling over, it's not dilapidated or broken down. It just needs some additional repair work if we were going to lease it out again. So we extended those timelines internally for those internal timelines with November Whiskey, an additional 6 months at our last meeting. But that doesn't affect we didn't change the overall term of the agreement as far as the end date for the development, and then, I don't know if I clarified before, but 703 has been transferred, 713, Josh and November Whiskey has under contract and an option. So both of those properties are subject to that agreement. The gist of the discussion that we had with the city staff was, is it possible to potentially include the old courthouse in a proposal? And everybody essentially thought that it was possible. It could be included in an RFP, either as a bid alternative or, well, probably as a bid alternative. You could do an option with it or without it. So that potential was there. At the end of that meeting, there wasn't any commitments, obviously by the city or by MDC or anyone, but there was a consensus that staff go back to the respective boards and encourage those boards to look at issuing a request for proposal, which would include the old City Hall site. But the caveats, obviously, with that were the city owns that property, and the city would be involved in the drafting of the RFP and the selection process. And ultimately, if the city didn't like the proposal, the city has veto power. It's the city's property, and if they don't want to include it, that's the city's choice. But the recommendation was to move forward with that group, to go back to our boards and suggest that the boards move forward with preparing an RFP and including that. That RFP crafting process could include whatever the priorities are for the respective entities, for MDC or for the city, or obviously for both. Recognizing that it needs to be transparent. Obviously, November Whiskey and the Pacific companies have been doing some work already, and make sure that it was open. It could be just the old City Hall site, it could be a larger vision, whatever the entities come up with in the RFP, and have it open for anybody to submit on that RFP. There wasn't any set track or anybody that was just being granted an approval at the beginning, so to speak. With those things, I think that kind of brings us to this point in the discussion. We can't require that Josh and November Whiskey put 703 and 713 into the RFP. They're under contract. It's the only thing that we can deal with in an RFP is the old City Hall site, and then how and if that would be included in a potential larger vision. So I think that's the history, Madam Mayor and Chairman Winder. I'd be happy to answer any questions, but the policy side is yours as elected and appointed officials, whether and how to move forward on the old City Hall site. MDC can still move forward with 703 and 713 in a larger vision without the old City Hall, but it's up to you whether you think that's worthwhile to approach and how to approach it if you do.
And I guess to just add one thing to it, the timing is perfect, as 703 and 713 are looking to move forward, that if this RFP were to be put out now, there could be some coordination among the projects. And so that's what makes this discussion at council timely.
One other item, Madam Mayor, the potential legislative solution also seems to be progressing well with the city and the county, and that went through the Senate committee, I want to say this week or Friday.
And last Thursday.
Last Thursday. It all runs together,
Yeah.
Madam Mayor, lately. But it seems to be well supported, and I anticipate that will be moving through the legislature and ultimately be passed.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I'm going to open this up for discussion. Mr. Palmer.
Madam Mayor, my initial thought was, before we get into heated discussions about the million different ways that we can all try to offend each other, my thought is to wait until we have a solution to the courthouse issue, because if if we're not going to require a courthouse opportunity in conjunction with whatever may or may not go there, I think that really clears up a lot of the questions about it and could make it as simple as putting it for sale. Due to nobody ever having to deal with providing the city any type of space or anything with it, I think might make it more appetizing to just purchase it and avoid the concerns that the city has had with regard to just opening just that property up for an RFP. Just my thoughts.
Madam Mayor, I can, just on the practical side, I'm not talking policy at all. You'll have an answer on the legislative issue by the end of the month. The legislature is set to get out the 23rd, and then we'll see what happens with the governor. So you'll at least know that part. I anticipate if you decide to do an RFP that it would take a month or so to put together between staff and everybody working on it. So just more practical things to consider.
Madam Mayor?
And I think, as you noted, you could put an add alternate on there that would be considered as they look at it and propose, because we still have an order. You know, our thing is the legislation does address a funding piece to it, but we still then would need to hopefully move together with the county to ask for it to be dismissed or revoked or whatever the right terminology is. Yes. Mr. Mueller, just pull it towards you.
Okay, so I think a color commentary piece that's probably a good one to explain is I actually agree with everything that you just said. The only caveat here is right now time is a pretty big deal, because what will happen is we're going to have the end of winter when everybody's going to want to kick off construction projects, and it's kind of coming fast. The other problem is we have people actually leasing some of the space right now. So before any type of building project can be kicked off, a notice has to be given and people have to be given the opportunity to clear the premises. And we have a window for construction of that size and scope. The window is very small. We had a very mild winter this year, but that was pure luck and it was very unexpected. If we have a bad winter next year, nobody's building during the winter because it costs substantially more, right? So one of the dilemmas that we have is, while I actually think if we wait out a legislative solution and then sell something or something like that, it's a good idea. At the same time, if we do have to go down the route of an RFP, we have an option to be able to put out an RFP. We essentially represent government, so we get to be as complicated as we want to be. We can put out an RFP that has two questions, like what would you do if you had to accommodate a courthouse, and what would you do if you didn't have to, right? We are able to publish that and put that out there and have it ready to go. And by being a little preemptive, just in case that's the route that we have to go, we save about a month's worth of time, and that month is critical when it comes to actual construction, if we want to get something going soon rather than later.
Madam Mayor?
Mr. Palmer.
This is the Nathan Ty show up here. Our concern with the RFP situation is that, at least to me, this councilman doesn't want to put out an RFP without including the 703 and 713 properties. Understanding the complications behind that, I think the most realistic opportunity to, unless council disagrees, would be to pursue selling it after we know the courthouse issue is no longer an issue. Unless we were to have it appraised, assuming, I don't know if it becomes less valuable because of a need that we would have with regard to selling, which we can't move on selling it without knowing whether we need it or not. So I really think we're just stuck, unless council is willing to do an RFP on just that property, which I'm not, stuck waiting to know whether we need it or not, and then moving forward with a sale.
So you want to do an RFP with someone else's property?
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Madam Mayor, no, I don't. I want to do an RFP only, no, I mean, this was the road I was trying to avoid us going down. Because, you know, for me, it's optics of the scenario. There's no greater friend to Meridian, I feel, than Josh Everts. He has the exact same motivations that the rest of us do and our passion for Meridian. The problem is, for me, I'm super worried about the optics of council putting up a piece of property that we own for an RFP when I mean, it's one thing when there's adjacent properties that Josh may own that he purchased, but when there's pieces of property that were purchased with tax dollars that were given to an individual, and then to have an RFP for an adjacent property when there's an obvious upper hand that was given by government. It's just the optics of it, even though the reality is it's a perfectly legitimate situation, but the optics of it are too strong in the wrong direction to go down that road, I feel, and could all be avoided. Understanding the construction issue may complicate it, but dealing with government complicates it. And so I really feel like that the best way to maintain the view of the whole situation, the relationships involved in it, is to wait, find out if we don't need the property, and then it makes it much more appetizing to me, I would think, knowing that you can have the property and not have to provide anything to the city other than pay for it.
Madam Mayor?
Mr. Burnt.
I don't think there's a person in either one of these bodies that are sitting up here right now that certainly, doesn't want to dot their I's and cross their T's to make sure that we're not making any mistakes, that we're doing everything above board. There's no doubt about that. Perception is reality, and I think we all understand that. However, Josh Everts, November Whiskey, owns those two properties, technically, on paper. And so it would, unless he is willing to give those properties up, to create, an RFP is what you're talking, about doing, I think it'd be pretty difficult, and so I don't think it would be a complicated conversation just to say hypothetically, if we were to offer up an RFP, I don't know if that RFP necessarily has, to do with the two existing properties that November Whiskey owns. Someone might want to, in their RFP proposal, may want to do something completely different that has nothing to do with what Mr. Everts has or what his vision is. I mean, that will be Mr. Everts' vision on what he wants to do with his RFP, but maybe someone else's vision is completely different, and maybe a completely different business, a completely different development. And so I think that if we're upfront, making sure that we dot our I's and cross our T's, making sure that we're above board and very transparent, and maybe a discussion needs to take place of, is it possible to do an RFP just on City Hall, but not necessarily, the two properties that are involved with November Whiskey?
Madam Mayor?
Ms. Lowell Roberts.
I agree with Councilman Burnt. I believe there is definitely an opportunity to do an RFP, and I think once that we have the courthouse issue not only through the legislature but resolved completely, then I think we can have the conversation, do we send it out for RFP or do we outright sell it? And I don't think until we know for sure that the courthouse issue is completely resolved that we should take that building and make any other commitments with it.
Other discussion?
So one point of clarification that's probably worth mentioning is the developers that exist in the conversation have made it clear that even if they had to build a courthouse, they would actually be able to factor that into the plans. So on one hand, the courthouse is an issue because this all becomes a lot clearer if that is resolved and goes away. But on the second hand, even if it doesn't go away and we really are stuck with building a courthouse down here that it appears none of us want to, we actually have a solution to even that scenario. Just, it's probably worth mentioning.
Madam Mayor.
Ms. Mylum.
So are we wanting to create an RFP because we have one contractor who wants to do something with the project? That's what it sounds like. And if so, wouldn't it be easier for them just to buy the piece of property? If you already have the person, if you already chose the winner, pretty much, and you're just putting an RFP out there, I don't know. Just confusing.
Madam Mayor,
Ms. Slow Roberts.
I don't know if they're still in play, but at one point, gosh, probably 6 or 8 months ago, I had heard that there were 2 other developers interested in participating in an RFP for just the City Hall piece.
You know, I guess just a little history here. When the city moved into this building, the council did have an opportunity to put that out there and put it up for sale. And the hope was to be part of a larger vision. And when you put it up for sale, you don't have any opportunity to know then what the future owner would have for that vision. And so that is why they held on to it, as to be part of a larger project that would benefit the public and the redevelopment of downtown. That was the decision made at that time. I think that we're at a crossroads again with that very same premise. Is you put it out for an RFP and the council would have an opportunity to say, does that vision fit the highest and best use and would benefit the public and the redevelopment of downtown? If you sell it, you don't have that control, for lack of a better word. And that is what you lose when you do that. Council has noted that it would take a handful of weeks to put together any kind of an RFP. And as Board Member Mueller mentioned, that you could have with a courtroom or without a courtroom, and what would that proposal be? That is another approach that you can do it. But there is a timing issue here, and if we're willing to take advantage of that timing opportunity, we had someone at the MDC board that said, hey, he would submit on the City Hall project, even knowing the other 2 lots are under development, because he felt he could also gain from economies of scale in doing some joint partnership or work with the project that 703 and 713 might be able to benefit. So I think with that timing in mind, you could serve one big project or 2 projects that work in synergies together by going ahead and moving forward now with those 2 caveats.
Madam Mayor.
Again, there's many choices. Ms. Mylum.
With all of that in mind, I think putting it out there with or without a courtroom, I think really complicates it. I think you're going to get less response. But I wouldn't have a problem with staff working on it if it's going to take several weeks. Hopefully by the time it's ready, we'll have an answer. And if for some reason we don't, then you can include the courthouse kind of as a last minute, before it goes out there. But I think that by putting it out without that, if we have an answer by then, I think it would be a lot cleaner and a lot easier to get more responses.
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Palmer.
the other major concern for me is I'm not willing to sign over a title where there's no mechanism to get it back.
Then build it in.
One quick thing to clarify. You do
Mr. Mueller,
understand.
I'll recognize you.
Oh, sorry. You do understand that if you're going to do anything with government property and sign it over to an individual, if they're going to be able to get a loan to finance any kind of project of any size whatsoever, you cannot have one of those clauses in it. No bank on earth will finance it. So if you're not willing to sign over property without a clause to be able to immediately swoop in and steal it back, you are effectively removing that property from any development whatsoever, ever. That's just a truth. Like, whether you understand the way banking and development works, that's true.
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Palmer.
to clarify, I'm not willing to sign it over without a mechanism to get it back if we are giving it away. If we're selling it through the normal process in which we would sell a piece of property, absolutely. Sign that sucker over. We don't own it. It's in the private hands. It will be much better handled by somebody that's not government. But I can't give it away without being able to get it back if what has been promised to be put there, some reason doesn't happen, we need it back. And if that's not a possibility, then whoever's going to build on it needs to buy it.
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Winder.
point of clarification, our agreement on 703 and 713, we do have the right to get it back if we declare him in default of the agreement and pursue legal remedies that we have for that. We just can't immediately take title back. So there are mechanisms in place if he doesn't build the project that we all agreed on to get it back.
No, it is. You get paid for it. You get cash.
Mr. Byrd.
I see squinty over there.
Madam Mayor.
You get cash.
Madam Mayor.
To tag along on Mayor's talk, we bought 703 and 713 when we got a good price on it, and Tammy and I are the only ones that were involved. We did it to get some property so that this kind of project could be done on that block. We envisioned, basically, the original envision was to only have the Bank of the Cascades buildings left on that block when we got done with redeveloping it. So I don't disagree that we wait until we find out what the legislature's doing with the courthouse. But and as far as construction, if you got started in July, August, you could be closed in so you could work through the winter even if you had a snowmobile. So I think we better just get the RFP ready, and I know that it's going to take the whole block to get it done, and then the council, you guys decide what you want to do with City Hall, whether you want to sell it outright or whatever you want to do. But those two buildings were purchased with that development in mind of the whole block, just not half a block.
Mr. Bastilan.
Yes, Madam Mayor, just a couple of clarifications. I agree that we shouldn't go forward with an RFP if we don't know exactly what the specifics of the RFP should be. But to Mr. Mueller's point, there's nothing to keep us from preparing an A and a B plan, as Councilwoman Malam said, that one that included a courthouse in the project and one that didn't, and then wait and see what happens with the legislature to see which of those you put forward. But I would agree with you that we put it through the RFP process rather than outright sale, so that you can include what you feel should be in that RFP, and you can accept it or not accept it, you can negotiate it, and so forth. But it isn't giving away the property, it's negotiating the sale of the property based on the RFP. So I think we need to be real clear about what we're talking about. We also have a third entity in that block, and that's the private owners that are not part of the old City Hall RFP, possibly, and the property that Josh now has the rights to on 703 and 713. So there could be, theoretically, 3 different developers that go into that property. It would behoove them, obviously, to work together to get the best bang for the buck for that total block. But we have no assurance on that, and I think the RFP process, in my estimation, is the most transparent process for the public.
Let me keep going, if you'll have me.
Mr. Mueller.
So it is worth pointing out, there's actually 5 different property owners on there. And by putting out an RFP, we're not at all actually in any way, shape, or form choosing winners. The interesting thing is there might be a perception that it's that way, but if there's any perception of that, there's not people with $30 to $65 million budgets lining up to build projects in downtown Meridian right now. So while there is only one person standing in line willing to spend that kind of money down here, and there's a decent chance they might win it, there is 5 private property owners on that block. And all of them have essentially at their core the same advantage and or disadvantage that the current interested party would have. And any other interested party is able to go and procure some of that property and also have an advantage if they want to. So as far as the possibility for some view of impropriety here, I think that that's just an issue of education. I mean, we have the press here right now. They can write about this if they want to. But the fact that the whole entire panel up here is very concerned about the fact that we need to be very, very transparent and make sure that this is being handed over correctly, I'm fairly certain that we can find a way to not stall out possibly one of the best and largest projects to ever come to downtown because we're scared that maybe it could look bad, even though every single thing that's originated so far has been 100% organic and in the public eye and even written about in the paper. So it's an interesting thing, but I definitely wouldn't say we have any chosen winners in this.
Madam Mayor?
Mr. Palmer.
Madam Mayor, maybe Mr. Lakey, can we get some clarification as to whether there is a mechanism to take the property back, or what the story is there?
Madam Mayor and Chairman Winder and Councilmember Palmer, I'll put a finer point on that. There is not a right of reversion, so it doesn't automatically go back. What we have built into the contract is liquidated damages for the property that's already been transferred, so the 703. That one does not have a mechanism to come back. We have specific performance built into the contract, which would require court action to essentially try to force Josh to do what he said he would do. So that parcel doesn't have a specific mechanism to come back. What Chairman Winder was talking about is the violation provisions of the agreement. If the agreement is violated, then we have a 30-day cure period. We have to provide notice of violation and an opportunity to cure to Mr. Evarts and give him an opportunity to correct what the violation is. If he doesn't, then we can terminate the agreement. And if we terminate that agreement before the property is transferred on 713, then that one would come back to the MDC because it hasn't been transferred yet, and if the agreement was properly terminated along with the option. So that's kind of the finer point. Part of it yes, part of it no. Liquidated damages and specific performance.
Mr. Neri, would you have anything you wanted to add?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I don't think so, other than it seems like there's a little lack of clarity. The city cannot give the property to anyone other than the MDC, so we can't transfer it, even with an RFP. We would still then need to partner with MDC for the transfer of the property. The only way the city can give property is to either a nonprofit or only to a governmental entity. And so that part is really a partnership that has to be done with MDC. If the objective is to then transfer the property at no sale to then get the RFP constructed as presented. As Councilman Palmer stated, you can certainly put it on the market. You can market it, declare it as no value to the city or no use for the city, and then get an appraisal and sell it. And that's an auction, and that's a different process. But I wasn't clear if everybody understood that MDC has different rules and ability to do things with property that the city does not. So the RFP part can be done, and if the intent is to transfer the property without a transfer of funds for those properties, then it could only be done through the MDC process.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Kavner.
Just a clarification for
Yeah.
Mr. Neri, if you don't mind, sorry. Should the city council want to transfer a property to the MDC, can they provide that transfer with certain conditions attached?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, members of the council, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Councilmember Cavanagh, absolutely. I mean, I think that's kind of been the discussion, is that would be part of the RFP process. If the city determined that the RFP didn't meet whatever requirements the city had, then they could decline the RFP, simply then remove the property from consideration. So that's really the one string that you could maintain before you transfer the property over.
Any other questions, comments?
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Kavner.
I value MDC's time here tonight, and I know that part of the goal was to hear from council on this issue, so I want to provide a couple thoughts. First, I just want to applaud MDC and the public that are here with an interest in some of these properties for having a vision. Many years ago, I was on MDC, and we were smacking our heads against the wall saying we need a vision for this area, and I applaud this group for coming up with that and bringing forth an idea. As a city council member, and I appreciate Mr. Mueller's comments about the perception, I really try and look at this as what would somebody who lives in Meridian, when they open up the newspaper, hear on the news, what would they hear? And here's what I see. I see that the Urban Renewal Agency gave a building away for a project, didn't quite work, and so they provided a second building at no cost that maybe would work, but would sure work better if the local government gave a third building in order to make a project work. I think if I read that in the newspaper, I saw it on TV, I'd wrinkle my brow. And I'd say, man, those are three assets that have been paid for with my tax dollars that are now going towards a project that wasn't, those were my dollars being spent. And I just don't know how the public would feel about that. And so that's the piece that I have wrestled with. I feel much more comfortable selling the building and letting the free market make the pick. Or, if the city needs to build a courthouse, to me, that opens up a compelling case to be made for our public that we have to build a courthouse, here is the land to do it, and there's a developer that's willing to include that. Our taxpayers are getting something in return for the asset of which they are giving up. Right now, all I hear is that for the assets that our taxpayers are giving up is a potential for a new great business development that will bring jobs and restaurants and entertainment, grow our economy. Well, that's great. Meridian's economy is also growing without that need. So I'm really struggling to find a compelling reason to support giving up a city-owned asset to benefit an overall larger commercial project. And that's hard because, as it's been articulated many times, the person behind the project is somebody who I consider a friend. But I think we, as elected officials, have to take the names out of the seats and make the determination about, what if it isn't Josh? What if it's somebody else? Boy, would we still be feeling the same way that we are? And so for me, that makes it easier to say, boy, I just don't see the value that I can articulate to our taxpayers in just giving up a city-owned piece of property.
Mayor.
Ms. Milam.
Based on what I've read on Nextdoor, if you put out an RFP for this to be a Trader Joe's with a parking garage on top. I think the taxpayers will be happy with that. Just kidding.
Well, and I think you're right that development's happening all around us, but not in downtown. Downtown always hosts or sports a number of problems and an uneven playing field. And that is why urban renewal districts are generally developed or considered is to help even that playing field and allow redevelopment to happen. It's been said many times, and I think that our public, in particular during Destination Downtown, said it is important to them that the heart and soul of our community is healthy and that investment happens down here. Well, there's a partnership expectation with redevelopment to even that playing field. The reason you're not seeing development in downtown is because of the challenges and the costs for redevelopment, and oftentimes those assets that are owned by a urban renewal district are considered to help incentivize those investments, to bring them to our downtown, and in the meantime bring services and jobs and life. So I guess you can see it in a number of different fashions, but that's traditionally some of the rationale behind having those assets and putting them to use in looking for that higher and better investment and bringing life and jobs into a downtown. Mr. Basselon.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, just one of the factors that Councilman Kavanagh left out of his concern is the fact that the goal of urban renewal is to increase property values, to increase the value of what is already here in some meaningful way because of all the things that the mayor was just talking about which limit it. First of all, scale. I mean, there's a reason why people are building in 10 Mile and not downtown, because they can get more property cheaper there than they can here, and the scale allows them to make a profit, which is what capitalism is all about. And I would submit to you, Councilman Kavanagh, that the equity increase in the private property value downtown over time will more than pay back the public's need to have revenue from the downtown. I can tell you from my own experience, having been an investor in downtown over the last 5-6 years, my property taxes have more than doubled in a 2-year time period. That tax money is going to the public. It's not going to anyone private, it's going to the public. And if we have a development on Broadway that's going to bring in over time millions of dollars of tax revenue, that's to the benefit of the whole Meridian community. So I think we've got to look at long range as well as short range in terms of value. And you're right about education, because nothing is being given away. There's no such thing as a free lunch. We're asking somebody to invest $2, $3, $4, $10 million in our downtown of their money, not our money. So there is no such thing as a free lunch. And I think that we have to take that longer view sometimes because it is an investment in our downtown.
Well, it doesn't appear that a decision or direction will be made tonight, or I don't get that sense. But certainly, if council would like to prove me wrong, I'm open to that.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Kavanagh.
Well, I am not one that is prepared to make any decision tonight. I do think it's important that this type of dialogue continues between MDC and the city Obviously, we will know the city's fate as it pertains to what, if anything, we may be required to do with that building in the coming weeks. It warrants either a joint memo between the two bodies or potentially a follow-up meeting. I'm very supportive of that. I enjoy having the opportunity to hear from our urban renewal commissioners and on this particular issue. So I think that nobody's closing the door, but I think I'm prepared to make a decision tonight.
Any other comments?
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Byrd?
just one thing for you guys, everybody to consider and stuff. We all have seen what's developed in Boise the last 5 or 6 years, how they have grown. I'll guarantee you, 50 years ago, you could have shot a rifle through that town and never hit a person. It took them, with their urban renewal district, that long. And if you get something started like this, it will just piggyback all around. We, and Tammy and I and Bill are the ones, that's why we did not move City Hall out of this downtown. We could have found property half the price if we'd wanted to go out to Eagle, 10 Mile, someplace like that. But we committed here. The MDC, thanks to Ashley, we got Compass to come down here and bring people down here. We put that building up and stuff. So just think what you want downtown here. Dirty dirt is always going to be more expensive than clean dirt. I just leave that with you guys to think about. You don't redevelop a town that didn't have a great setup to start with for the last 40 years. We've had the crossroads and all them go in out there and draw a lot of that away there. So just think, do you want to redevelop downtown? If so, this block is a good place to start.
Madam Mayor?
Mr. Palmer?
Madam Mayor and Mr. Byrd, to that point, I think that I agree that we want to see this stuff redeveloped, and it's best done in the private sector through the selling of it. Because I mean, you bring up building that Compass and VRT is in. That's a building that tax dollars continue to go towards debt on. The MDC doesn't. They're not on the title. I mean that to me is a disgusting situation. The fact that there was an unelected board that built a building, gave it away, is paying the debt on it, and isn't on the title. And so to me, instead of turning properties over to MDC or to another government agency to try to figure out who best to give them to because they might build the coolest thing, this is why I am consistently in favor of selling properties. Because if we sell it, then it's in the private sector's hand. And while we very well may, in that situation, get the project that we all these ideas of what may end up there that we've been hearing for the last few months, we're all super excited about that. But the process in which that property is transferred ownership needs to be done in the purest way. And that is not by just transferring it between governments to give it away. Especially without an opportunity to get it back if what you were told was going to be built isn't built. I don't foresee that being the issue, but whoever it may be, whether it was Josh or anybody else, if there's always a chance that isn't going to happen. And so to give it away without a mechanism to get it back because a bank doesn't like that language is inappropriate to me.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, Ms. Bevan.
Thank you. I just want to point out that, throughout MDC and all the many times that November Whiskey has come and presented to us, that, where we are today is not where we were ever intended to be today. So I think in the original process of going through the 703 and 713 and coming and presenting, tens of thousands of dollars have gone through November Whiskey and trying to make this happen. And I think we just need to remember that that point is that there was a lot of heart and a lot of drawings and a lot of renditions and a lot of changes. I mean, if there could already be a building on 703, there would be. And so we just need to remember that I think that we need to continue with that same passion that we started with at the very beginning, because I think that that's important to remember.
Good reminder.
Madam Mayor,
Ms. Mylum.
so the RFP is put out then by MDC, correct? Does the council have any say in the final choice, or is that all MDC? Is it, we have this? Okay.
Madam Mayor?
Hold on, we'll have Mr. Lakey respond to that question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Councilmember Mylum. The RFP we anticipated would be put out by MDC, but it would be developed and approved both by the city and by MDC. So if both entities decide to do it, you're on the same page as to what's issued. Both the city and MDC would be involved in selecting the successful proposal. And then even after that, the city would still have the final veto on whether or not to transfer the property. That it's the city's property. It would have to be transferred to MDC to be moved forward in whatever development is selected. So the city has most of the cards in this one.
Thank you.
Ms. Lowe Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, but he answered my question in that process.
Thank you. Mr. Mueller.
Okay, I want to make a comment, but I want to take my MDC hat off for a second and be a member of the public. So, couple things. One is, if you guys spend a lot of time downtown, like Old Town Meridian, which I do, we just lost one of 2 tech companies in downtown. They needed to move. They looked for space. They haven't been able to find space, so they're gone. I'm hiring 5 people a week right now. I think I'm the largest employer in downtown Meridian next to City Hall. And I'm out of space. And I'm literally going campus style, and it's insanely expensive for me because I'm going to have to start signing leases on multiple buildings, which just gets stupid. The amount of coffee machines I have to buy is absolutely ridiculous. And you're frankly going to lose me soon because I can't fit down here, okay? That's just the truth of what's going on in downtown. We need development. We have even flagship restaurants that I can't actually say because it's on Friends that basically are at the point where they want to move into essentially something kind of like Boise, a downtown entertainment district that doesn't exist in Meridian. And if we don't solve these problems soon, they're going to leave too. And we're essentially going to be the place that you pass through on I-84 to go to downtown Boise to have a good night out and get a drink and a bite to eat. That's a reality of what is actually happening. Our company, when we hire an employee right now, our average employee buys a home, their first time home ever, within 3 months of getting hired by us. You know where they buy their homes? Because our offices are in downtown Meridian, they buy their homes in Meridian. They live out here. So as a member of the public, on one hand, I sit here, this is why I'm on urban renewal. I will never be a good city employee. You guys can all laugh at me, and it's true. I would laugh at myself if I ever went to try to actually be in politics. But the reality is I'm on urban renewal because our job is not to only protect taxpayer money. That's your guys' job, and you do a great job at it. Our job is to think strategically about downtown and how are we going to save the fact that we have businesses, even now, why we all think that we're so focused on building downtown, we're losing businesses. They don't have space to go. We have coffee shops that don't have enough people. Do you know I'm the highest grossing person at both our coffee shop and Flatbread? I know both owners. They have their little system. I've spent more at both of those places than anybody else in history. If we're not quite growing like people think we are. Yes, we are growing, but our downtown is not, okay? So we do need development. Time is of the essence. We are losing companies right now as we speak. And things like this, I gotta correct, I'm sorry, I'm talking very long, but I gotta correct a couple of facts, because we actually took a really long point to meet with the Meridian Press to make sure that the article that you're scared about getting published someday, it's an impossibility that that would ever be published, because already they know enough information to know that what you said's actually not possible. So the property that Josh has currently, he's already expressed and said, if we cannot move forward on a bigger project, that he will develop that. But the trick is, you can't just say, okay, go ahead and start that, and we'll get back to you on the other greater thing, because there's an economy of scale thing. I'm either doing a loan for this much money for this fixed project, or I'm doing a loan for the whole thing. We can't do one without the other. So that is currently on hold while he's waiting for a response essentially from us, okay? So that's why that's on hold. Secondly, those properties are back on the tax code. So he has paid property tax on them, which they weren't for the last several years. They were just a drain on city and taxpayers. So we're happy that they're at least back on the tax code. Somebody is paying taxes on it. There will be a development there. We're hoping for a larger one. Secondly, they've never ever expressed an interest at all to necessarily get Meridian City Hall for free. That's something we all seem to kind of be projecting onto them. I don't think they care. They're more interested in what is the way to go about doing a bigger development. Now, me as an MDC member, I understand this block is a very strategic place in downtown, and we only get one shot at doing this right. And it's important that we do it right. Now, here's the dilemma that we run into, and I'm just going to be very transparent here. We have the public and everyone here. As an MDC member trying to be strategic for downtown, saying what do we need downtown for downtown to thrive? If we go a public route and we say, let's just put it up for auction and sell it, we lose our ability to be strategic because anybody can buy it. The Harvest Church, which we all like and has done a great job, and we actually partner with them on a transportation program. They could see an immense amount of value in it and literally buy it, pay twice the market rate, and level the thing and just turn it into church parking. Now, while they have been a good partner to downtown, that is not a strategic use of a whole entire city block that we can develop, right? So to be able to control the destiny in some way of this development, it doesn't mean we have to give it to a chosen winner. I don't care what developer builds something. I just know that we need stuff built down here, right? So we need to be able to somewhat, I think, control this process through an RFP to make sure that the greater strategy of both MDC, people like me from the public that don't get paid to do this, that somehow this takes like 20 hours of my life every single week, right? Somehow we get what we actually need for downtown, and we all agree, even city council, that it is strategic, right? So we have, this isn't as easy as, oh, well, I just want to sell it to public sector, or those guys want to give it to a developer that's pre-chosen. It's not that simple, right? The other thing I would say, if you like this meeting and like hearing input from us, we meet every week, right there, actually. We have a property committee that discusses this stuff in detail, and this is a project that I personally have worked on for almost a year, and it's not only even, I'll be quiet after the 90 seconds. This project isn't even just this project. This project is connected to the Union Pacific land, which is connected to ProBuild. It's connected to a greater vision of all of downtown, and there's a lot of information. Information that, believe it or not, the whole entire press has been briefed on. We met with them for, how long did we meet? 3 hours, I think it took, or 2 hours or something to explain all of this. So there's a lot of details around this. It's not just as simple as, hey, I just want to sell it, or hey, I don't want to just do an RFP that automatically will be won by Pacific Partners. Does that make sense? I hope that helps. Shed some light.
Madam Mayor?
Mr. Palmer.
So here's a question and then the reason for it. How long does it take to prepare the process for either going an RFP route or auction or whatever mechanism to just sell the thing route, and whatever the time frame those are, to know when we could, the reason I'm saying this is if we were to begin the process on both routes, and then by the time it's time to say go on one of them, we might have more information with regard to the courthouse and be able to make a better decision which way to go. Or is it none of that can begin until we do say go.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, Councilman Palmer, so, I wish there was an easy answer, you know, there never is. Sure. The RFP process will take a little bit longer because as Mr. Lakey stated, the development of what the city and the MDC board is interested in, what you'd like it to contain, will probably take 30 to 45 days to develop that. Putting that then out to the marketplace, the timing is whatever you choose. 45 days, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever you choose is fine. So that process will likely take quite a bit longer. And really, I think the question we really know, are asking and want a decision at some point is, do you want us to do that? The selling part is simpler. There's a public hearing process that's required. There's declaration that has to be noticed in the paper. There's a public hearing that's held, and then the auction itself. So if you want to sell property, you can do that probably with a due diligence period and everything else that might go with it, 60 to 90 days max, and you can be done with it, probably closer to 60. So you can do the selling very quickly. But the other piece, because again, we're still looking at the development of the RFP and what you're looking for, will generally take a little bit longer. And again, you want to put it out on the street for at least 30 days, if not 60 or 90, depending on what you're looking for.
Madam Mayor? And for the selling version, the auction, I guess, what does that look like? Is it okay, on such and such day, we're going to have a auction of the property? Or is it bids are open for 30 days?
Madam Mayor, members of the Councilman Palmer, you know, I apologize, I don't remember the specifics of the statute. We haven't sold many pieces of property with the city since I've been here. The noticing part and all of that stuff is done. There is a set date for the auction to be held. In the past, the ones we did simply a closed bid. We set a minimum price. We did a closed bid, and we got better than the minimum price for it. Here, when you're talking a large parcel, you're probably going to have an appraisal and some other things that'll have to go into it. And then whether or not you do like a public auction, how that auction's done, I'd have to look. There isn't a lot of changes in the code in that regard, so how the public auction is held, I couldn't tell you specifically off the top of my head how we would do that. I think that's a decision for the council on how they'd like to acquire those bids and whether or not you'd leave it open for a period of time. You know, it's not eBay, so you really can't just leave it out there and have people constantly bidding against each other. But you're going to set a minimum, and you're going to have to do some due diligence to make that determination as well.
Madam Mayor?
And you would have to sell that to the highest bid.
Correct.
Madam Mayor? I think we need to clarify something. An RFP process is not a giveaway process. It is a sales process. And I hope maybe Council Lakey could explain. We have been through the RFP process with a number of properties through MDC. And you put out the RFP, laying out what you would like to see done with that property or how it would be used. But then you have to negotiate a sale, and you get people who say they are willing to pay this, that, or the other thing in order to acquire that property. So the RFP process is a sales process. It isn't a giveaway process. You could, if you felt that it would be in the benefit of the public to sell it for $1 because somebody's going to invest $10 million, you could do that if that's the best deal for the public, but you are selling the property. Am I right or wrong?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, Mr. Basilone, you're not wrong in relation to MDC. The city cannot sell it to an individual based on an RFP. But we could sell it to MDC, but we cannot sell it to one individual person without a public bidding process.
Right, but what I'm saying, if it came to MDC and we put it out for an RFP, we would be negotiating with whoever applies through that process for the best deal for the public. That is the point I wanted to make.
Yeah, and Mr. Russell, you're absolutely correct. What I'm saying is the city can only give it to MDC or sell it to MDC as an individual buyer. If we want to sell it to anyone else, it has to be done through the public auction.
That's correct. Okay.
Madam Mayor?
Mr. Burt.
There's been a lot of discussion, a lot of debate, and I really respect it and I appreciate it. It's important. I agree with Commissioner Basilone and the mayor and others who have spoke about the grander and greater vision that this project brings downtown. I think that there is an absolute way. I never have ever in my life professed to be the smartest person in the room. Probably never will be. That's the reason why we have folks like Council Lakey, Mr. Neri and others who counsel us to make sure that we are doing the right thing, that we are being transparent, that we are making legal decisions, that we are doing the best job to put it out there in front of people. Let's let them do their job, all right? Let's agree this evening that we're going to do some type of RFP, or at least start the process. Doesn't mean that we have to put it out, but at least maybe start the process, do it the right way, and not lose sight of the grander vision of what's going to happen to downtown if this project, whether it's Josh or anyone else, can do for the greater good and what can happen economically to revitalize what we truly love, which is downtown. That's my opinion.
Is that a motion?
Could be. I don't know.
Madam Mayor. Bill, don't go there.
Mr. Palmer.
Madam Mayor, Mr. Neri, I had like 80 more questions. What were they? So, okay. So if we're looking at 6 weeks to even being able to say, okay, RFP is open, and a much longer process to actually dispose of the property that way. But 60 to 90 days, I think is what you said, for selling it route.
Estimate, yes.
Would we be able to say stop up until auction day? Or is it, if we put out a notice saying we're going to sell this property on this day, is it we're selling it on that day?
Madam Mayor, members of the council and the MDC, my recollection of the statute, and it's been a while since I've looked at that on disposal, once you've made the determination that it is of no longer use for the public and you're going to notice it out for auction, you cannot take it back. You could not get your minimum price, whatever the minimum price you've set. If you don't get that, you certainly don't have to sell it. At that point, you can actually negotiate a sale with anybody if you don't get the minimum price. But once you have made that declaration that you no longer need it and set a minimum price and notice that there's a sale, then you can't take it back. So there is a stopping point before that, the public hearing process, which can be 60 days out. But at a certain point, you don't have the ability to rescind that.
Madam Mayor, then yeah, I think as much as I hate having staff and anybody preparing two things knowing we're going to throw one out the window, I think maybe the best move in light of making sure that there's a timing, that we're not delaying the possibility of this being an opportunity, is start the process on both, making sure that we know where the cutoff dates are so that we don't go too far on one and we're stuck with that one. And that way we've begun the process tonight of being able to dispose of it how we choose as we gather more information and as we approach those drop-dead deadlines.
Madam Mayor, members of council, Councilmember Palmer, maybe on that piece, if the direction from the council is to begin the staff process and work in the RFP, we can then come back to the council probably, maybe not next week's meeting, but the meeting after, to give you that timetable on the sale piece, so that you'll have a better, clearer understanding. Because like some of those deadlines and things I'm not as clear on tonight in my head. So we could at least come back to you in 2 weeks with that, because you're not going to start anything on that right away, and you're still going to have to do appraisals and other things. But at least we can give you the timeline on the sale portion in 2 weeks.
Madam Mayor,
Ms. Mylum.
it's my turn. I'm just kidding. Sorry, just teasing. I believe that I should almost make a motion. We should go ahead with the preparing of the RFP. I do like the idea of being able to approve the project and not just selling it to somebody who's going to put in a car lot or a pawn shop or something that's not going to add economic vitality to downtown Meridian. So, yep, I move that we start preparing RFP and with a A and a B, just in case there has to be a courthouse involved.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Discussion.
Madam Mayor?
Mr. Palmer.
I think that as elected officials, we do a really good job of talking a lot and I'm guilty of that. And I think that we could go down this route of just looking at an RFP, and then maybe we get to a point where we decide, shoot, we would have rather, this just isn't going to work, something came up, whatever it might be, we'd rather go the auction route, and then we've lost time. And so I really don't see any harm in moving both options forward, at least directing staff to do that, so that when we can make that decision as more information is gathered and as we get closer to those dates, and as that Mr. Neri will figure out for us. So with that, as a substitute motion,
Madam Mayor.
I move just that.
Ms. Mylum.
Councilman Palmer, I guess part of it is not just staff time. With selling a property, there's going to be appraisals and a lot of other financial obligations that go into the sale of a property. And I guess personally, I just don't understand the rush of the sale. I understand the rush of the RFP, because people want to get moving on it. I feel that if we don't come up with something that we like and approve, then we can sell the property. I think that's a great backup plan.
Point.
I just don't think it should be the plan A. It's more like a plan B or C.
Madam Mayor?
Mr. Palmer.
And my motion didn't make, which I hope maybe gets a second, didn't say favor one or the other. Obviously, I have a favoring, but the motion wasn't move forward with this, and if it doesn't work, do an RFP. It's figure out the mechanisms for both and know when we have to pick one so that we can begin the process and not waste any time should one or the other become more appetizing as we gain more information later.
Well,
Madam Mayor.
that motion?
I'll second that for the sake of maybe advancing the discussion. Madam Mayor, if I may. I'm somewhat supportive of the concept of Mr. Palmer's motion. Before the vote, I'd like some better clarity about what the goal of the RFP would be, what it would include. I mean, there's some certain elements that we have talked about and talked around here tonight. I would want some stronger clarity, some stronger sideboards before I would be supportive of casting a positive vote for moving forward along Mr. Palmer's path. So I don't know if Mr. Palmer's got some thoughts that he'd like to share about what that RFP would look like. If legal counsel, Madam Mayor, if you've got thoughts about what you would want to have that include, to me that would be helpful. A hypothetical RFP gives me a lot of heartburn.
Madam Mayor?
Mr. Burns.
I mean, I don't know if we would be just throwing something hypothetically out there, you know? I think that, obviously, we're not going to leave it in the hands of council or staff or whoever might be, writing up this RFP and let it go out. Obviously, we're going to have discussion about it. I think that maybe what the motion is that we allow that discussion to take place, that we allow the conversation to take place, and maybe in that motion say, we reconvene on such date to talk about what was proposed, and then have significant discussion and serious discussion in regard to what that RFP may or may not look like.
I think both councils have heard enough of the discussion. They probably have a good baseline to bring something back in 2 weeks' time that can give you key elements to an RFP, and in addition to say if the RFP is not the route chosen at that time, the specific steps to disposal of a city property. Yes, Ashley.
Madam Mayor, Chairman Winder, and members of the council and board, we do have a property committee meeting next Wednesday, the 21st at 3 p.m. in your city council conference room. We could invite anyone from this commission and this council to attend that, and we could talk through this a little bit more. Usually, Council Lakey is in attendance of that. We would certainly invite Council Neri to be a part of that discussion, and we can focus that hour on this discussion alone.
Mr. Lakey.
Madam Chair, I think at least I have some idea of the vision that you all have been talking about. I think the RFP would have the opportunity to have a single potential project with just the building. But there's also, I've heard a lot of comments about incorporating it into a larger vision. So you can have, RFPs are usually fairly broad in their description. You can do this, or you can do this, or give us your ideas besides those things. But we can certainly include language that allows them to do one or encompass it in some type of larger vision for either the block or even beyond that. But all of that is, we bring a draft to you, and then you can cut it back or modify it or change it, and potentially we can kind of talk about some of those larger picture things in our property committee. If some of the city officials want to come, just make sure we're all copacetic with open meeting laws. But so
it sounds like it could be further discussed at the property meeting. Mr. Neri can come back in 2 weeks and lay out bullets to consider in an RFP, and give any updates on what disposal of city-owned property would look like as well. Further discussion from council?
Madam Mayor, Chairman
Mr.
Winter.
Burns.
Councilor Lakey, Mr. Neri, any further discussion you need from us, or any direction, any questions you have from us before we have a vote? You have everything that you need?
Yeah, 2 weeks looks good.
Madam Mayor?
Mr. Palmer.
And maybe also include in the discussion, as the mayor's talked about before, the parking lot that we stole in front of us as an opportunity to be included in it, assuming the parking would, in whatever mechanism, be replaced. Yeah, parking lot in front of us. But, and just as a further comment, I think that, you know, if Mr. Everts at any point decided to transfer the titles back, give the property back, I feel like this council would be much happier to move forward as fast as humanly possible on, you know, the normal RFP process with those included. But he owns them, it's up to him. So that, I think this is our best route, assuming those properties are going to stay there.
Madam Mayor. Down here.
Mr.
Sorry.
Kavanagh.
I have to echo Councilmember Palmer's comments. I recognize Mr. Everett worked his contract, has entitlements to the land. I appreciate that, but boy, we would have been done a lot sooner tonight if you would just offer to give them back, or quite frankly, if the MDC had asked for them back. And I appreciate the discussion tonight, but there's a couple other mechanisms that we haven't discussed that involve asking for the property back, or for the current person with the entitlements to turn them back. If this MDC doesn't want to do that, that's fine, but it definitely has complicated the process.
That property is owned.
Madam Mayor?
I don't understand why this is even a discussion. That property is owned.
Madam
It's
Mayor?
owned. It went through a process, and the MDC board made a decision.
Madam Mayor?
Mr. Kavanagh.
When I ask the question, I'm happy to answer it. The reason why it's coming up is because the city council is being asked to dispose of a taxpayer-owned resource to give to a private owner for a project. And some of us have some issues with that, and we want to make sure that we feel comfortable in our decision. That's why.
Well, I'm sorry. I don't think MDC ever gave the impression of that. I have not heard one person on the MDC board say that. So I'm sorry, I disagree. But we have a motion on the table right now, and I would ask, is there any further discussion pertaining to the motion? Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Milam?
No.
Councilmember Burnt?
Aye.
Councilmember Palmer? Aye. Wait, Councilmember Little Roberts?
The substitute.
I'm sorry. Mr. Clerk, I'll just clarify. The motion is the amended motion to move forward with both the RFP and.
I'm sorry.
Yes. So maybe start roll call.
Wait, Madam Mayor, sorry, discussion real quick.
Okay.
I guess I don't have a problem with looking into the sale of the property. I don't want to spend any money and a whole lot of city resources or time working on that option because I think that should be the last option.
Madam Mayor.
So,
Mr. Palmer, I'll ask Mr. Palmer to give a little bit more background behind the motion or the intent.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I think where we're going to have in a couple weeks, a lot better, where it is a faster process. I don't think we're going to lose any ground by waiting a couple weeks to find out from Mr. Neri exactly what that process is. And I'm fine with the intent of the motion, not necessarily meaning to spend money other than finding out exactly what the process is going to be, because they can start the RFP process while we gather the information on exactly how this other one would go. And then if it's appropriate, then to decide, okay, we now know how this works. Let's move forward with paying for an appraisal and so on, because we know that the deadlines for both.
So your motion is to start the process of developing an RFP and bring back in 2 weeks the key components to what that RFP would have, as well as an outline of disposal of city-owned property.
Yes.
Yes? Does second agree?
Yes.
Okay. That's the motion that we're voting on, or you're voting on. Any further clarification needed? Okay. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Mylum?
Aye.
Councilmember Burnt?
Aye.
Councilmember Palmer?
Aye.
Councilmember Little Roberts?
Aye.
Councilmember Cavanagh?
Aye.
Councilmember Borton?
Abstain.
Okay. The motion passes, and we'll set this on the 27th. Certainly, council, if we don't want a quorum, but if you would like to attend the property meeting, if you will let Ashley know, so she'll have a better indication of
We're going to do, yeah.
if we have a quorum or not.
Madam Mayor.
Madam Mayor.
Jinx, you owe me Coke. Oh.
Ms. Mylum.
I guess wanted to clarify for Bill or whoever's going to be working on that. When you bring back the information, can you please include all financial obligations on the sale of a property? Thank you.
Mr. Kavner.
Madam Mayor, question, I think maybe for Mr. Neri or the clerk. If there's 4 council members who want to attend that, are we in a position that we should just notice that as a meeting and what that process looks like? I don't want to preclude a council member from attending, but I also don't want us to notice as a meeting if we don't have enough members who are going to be there. I just don't want to limit anybody's option to be able to attend or not attend.
Madam Mayor.
The property meeting is next week, Wednesday?
Wednesday
At 3?
At 3 o'clock.
Wednesday at 3.
And Madam Mayor and members of the council and the board, we notice the property committee quite often as a public meeting, just because there are times that we do have a quorum in our own board in attendance. So I'm not concerned about that. I just want to make sure that we properly notice.
We will ask, CJ, would you also notice it just as an advisory notice, just in case we would have a quorum?
We were safe either way.
Does that work, Bill? Okay, as an official meeting, maybe.
Yeah, so Madam Mayor, members of the council, so the problem is there is no such thing. So you can, if you notice a meeting and you don't have a quorum, then you can't have the meeting. So that's the problem. So if you can decide, I think, CJ, they can notice it by Friday, I believe. So if you can let CJ know by Friday. If he knows there's 4 of you going to be there, we'll just notice it as a meeting. We have to record it and the other things. If there isn't a quorum, then you're not going to notice the meeting. You can still attend it, but if there's only 3 of you that have the time or the ability to be there, then we don't have to notice that, even if MDC does. So I just don't want to notice a meeting and then we don't have a quorum and then we still hold the meeting anyway, and we're really not supposed to do that. So.
Okay. Well, and how does that work? Because I'm on that committee. I'll be there irregardless.
But you don't count as part of the
Okay.
council, so you're okay for that.
Okay.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Palmer.
Remember, just before we move off this, I just wanted to reiterate that we are all super excited about the opportunities for our next door neighbor here. And while we all have differing opinions on the best way to make all that happen in between, we all want it to happen. We're all on board for this. And I just pray that at the end of the day, we can figure out a way that it ends up kosher for everybody, no problems, and so that we can have this amazing project. Again, we all want it. Let's just figure out a way and make it happen.
Mr. Vasic.
Madam Mayor, the other thing that I would suggest is maybe we ask Ashley in that property meeting to bring the renderings and stuff on the proposed 703 and 713 piece so that council members that might not have seen that can see Josh's vision and some of the renderings and the dollars that were spent on that corner.
Mr. Commissioner Vlasic and Madam Mayor and members, I will ask Josh to get me the current updated renderings for you, and we will have those available.
Okay, anything further on this item? Moving on, we will move to item number 5, the Union Pacific Railroad update.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council, members of our board. I'm going to keep the next 3 items fairly quick, just because I know that you've had a very long meeting, and then our board is going into our regular meeting right after this. But just wanted to give you a little bit of an update on some projects that we're working on. I'm going to start with a little bit of history on each of those, so I hope my board members will just give me just a little bit of latitude, but I'll keep it quick. So as you know, ProBuild is looking at consolidating their operations east of 3rd Street. This includes the potential construction of a new spur. ProBuild, in their conversations with us, has granted permission to us late last summer, early last fall, to pursue a conversation with Union Pacific. Up to this date, we had not had a relationship of our own with Union Pacific. And thanks in part to Brenda Sherwood, your Economic Development Director, who was able to bring us into a meeting with ProBuild. That was very helpful for us. We talked to UP about the possibility of utilizing the space between Main Street and East 3rd for parking and also potential some open space for that entire property with ProBuild relocating. We were very fortunate to get UP out from Nebraska to meet with us at the end of October on site. We had some representation from some of our MDC board commissioners. Yes. We talked through the concepts that you have in front of you. I just wanted to make sure that you all had the 2 different ideas that have been bantered around. We know that these will have to be modified at some point. In general, in that meeting, it was very successful, and I can let some of my board members fill in on that conversation. But generally, UP walked away feeling pretty good about our conversation. They are very supportive of the parking concept because it does fit within their mission. And they encouraged us to submit a lease application. In November, we obtained permission from UP to be able to have our civil and environmental consultants out on site. The goal was to do a high-level walkthrough in order to give my MDC board the ability to understand what the high-level costs may be if we were to move forward with the removal of structures, along with the construction of parking and some streetscape along Broadway. So those consultants provided MDC numbers for removal of structures, the environmental remediation. We're assuming worst case scenario at this point. UP would not allow us to do any testing until we have a lease in place. It includes the parking lot construction. It includes open space construction. and Broadway Avenue streetscape and lighting on the south side. In January, our board reviewed those numbers and authorized me to be able to submit a lease application to Union Pacific. That application has been submitted. We know that the concept plan in front of you will need to be modified. At the time that this was drawn back about a year ago almost, we weren't sure if ProBuild was willing to give up the building on the corner of Main Street and Broadway, as they were undergoing their own negotiations with Union Pacific. They are willing to give that property back or that building back, and so we would modify our plans. I am waiting on formal comments from Union Pacific. We have been in verbal discussions about some of the questions they have regarding the site plans. They aren't very keen, unfortunately, on open space, but we're trying to work through that and figure out if our insurance through ICRIMP would cover some of their concerns. So we are working through that. They are also working through potential lease rates based on market rates. And we have given them an idea of what construction costs we may be incurring to be able to move forward with one of these plans. So hopefully we can come to a consensus soon. This is the most up-to-date information that I have at this time, but it's been a very positive conversation. They seem very willing to work with us, and so I'm very hopeful that we're going to be able to come forward with an actual proposal. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. And if my board, who's been involved in the conversation, would like to add anything, please feel free to do so.
Thank you, Ashley. Any addition to the presentation that Ashley gave by the board? Any questions from council?
Madam Mayor? And maybe Ashley.
Or Bernd?
Maybe Ashley stated this. I didn't hear. I apologize. On the pinkish, peaches area where it says area to remain, is that going to be dirt or gravel or what?
It would be some level of kind of gravel surface that would minimize dust. We were looking at ways to minimize some of the costs, so that would be more overflow area.
And there are some buildings on there too that
would
would remain, that are not part of the project.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Kavner.
Not a question, just more a comment. This is great. This is awesome news to hear. I want to thank, I was mentioning to Commissioner McCarville underneath my breath, I never thought in a million years something like this would happen. So to the MDC commissioners and staff that helped bring this to us tonight, even to get to this step is no small feat I'm aware of. So job well done. Really appreciate you sharing this tonight.
Any other questions from council? Okay, thank you. Item 6 is the 9 Mile Creek, or not.
The 9 Mile floodplain.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Mayor, members of the council, and the commission. Just to give, again, a little bit more historical context for those who are newer. In the 2000s, MDC became aware of the 9 Mile floodplain. This impacts properties primarily between the Union Pacific rail line tracks and Franklin Road. In 2011, MDC hired a consultant to assist with understanding what improvements would be needed in order to get those properties out of the floodplain. We had the opportunity during the Split Corridor project, as many of you may remember, to be able to oversize a culvert under Meridian Road, hopefully allowing for better flows and to eliminate some of the floodplain issues. As we were moving forward with our study, we were informed in 2012 that FEMA was remapping the entire Boise watershed. So our remapping efforts were put on hold because we were just a very small area within a very large study area. We were told we would have draft maps by 2014. Unfortunately, that did not happen. We received a draft map in December of 2016. So those draft maps were issued, and unfortunately, FEMA increased the flood, based on the draft maps, the floodplain. There's only one property based on those draft maps that is outside of the floodplain, and that's Eric Davis's property on the east side of Main Street on the south side of the tracks. Every other property within the urban renewal district south of the tracks and between Franklin Road is now forecasted to be within a floodplain. And this has horrible implications for redevelopment and for those property owners. So in 2017, our consultant filed an appeal of the map based on their calculations and flow. And essentially, the best way to describe this is that FEMA looks at this at 100,000 foot level. Our consultant was able to bring it down to a 30,000 foot level and bring in more information and data to be able to say your flows are much too high. So we put in an appeal in August. FEMA responded, I would say, Commissioner Winder, probably 6 weeks, 8 weeks after we placed that appeal in. We started having conversations with the Corps of Engineers, FEMA, along with the floodplain administrator with Meridian. And while they haven't accepted what our flow rate is, and we were initially proposing around 80 CFS, they certainly are not going to move forward with 145 CFS based on those draft maps. And right now we're working from a model of 100 CFS, which is significantly decreased. And that's good news for our area. FEMA has agreed graciously, and I'm not sure if your floodplain administrator has given you an update on this, but has agreed to assist with the hydraulic modeling. They're taking our data that they just received in the last couple of weeks, and they will recreate the model based on 100 CFS. Once we have that information, it'll probably be about 8 weeks. We can take that information, put it into our models, and we can determine what properties are impacted and what improvements are needed and what those costs may be. And so that's kind of where we are. That is where we are at this point. We believe this is a very important project. This is the future development area of downtown. And so my goal as the administrator is by the time we sunset at the end of calendar year 2026 is to go through this process, go through a letter of map revision with FEMA to get these properties out of the floodplain once the improvements are made, and it would allow for future development. It is a long process. It's an arduous process. It will likely require some partnerships. There are federal grant monies available for some of these improvements, but we don't know what we're looking at quite yet. So happy to answer any questions that I might be able to answer. I sat on a FEMA conference call recently. I understood about 80% of it, so I felt that that was pretty good. But your floodplain administrator, I just have to say, council members is amazing, and they have just bent over backwards to work with our agency, and I want to thank you for that.
Thank you. Any questions from the board or from the council? Thank you. And last but not least, the 10-mile update. And you provided a nice packet of information on that.
Mayor, council, board members, again, I'll give just a little bit of a historical perspective and move this fairly quickly.
Can you pull the mic up?
I'm so sorry. Yeah. As you all know, the district was established in 2016 by the City Council. Our owner participation agreement with Brighton Corporation for that first part of the development was recorded in February of 2017, and that was based on the development agreements and the specific plan that this council approved. That owner participation agreement, OPA as we call it for short, included 15 segments of improvements for approximately $16.5 million in improvements. This included reimbursable improvements, financing at 5%, costs on improvements, and right-of-way. And this is slated, most of these improvements are slated between 2016 and 2019. We receive reports from Brighton on a regular basis. That's what I have given to you, all the reports since we first started getting reports in March of 2017. They're not always monthly because they are very, very busy, but Jonathan Wardle from Brighton Corporation has been great in communicating with us as needed. So as you can see in the reports, we ask for infrastructure, we ask for new building permits, we ask for new tenants, new land entitlements, forthcoming pre-application meetings and land use hearings. Those are important for us to know because those affect our owner participation agreement. All those land use entitlements need to be included as exhibits. In 2017, development agreements with the city were modified and final plats were recorded. And so tonight, at our regular board meeting after this meeting, we will be reviewing our very first amendment to the owner participation agreement to incorporate all the development agreements and final plats that have been recorded. We need to ensure that our owner participation agreement is up to date. The entire 10-mile district is generating approximately $40,000 in increment this year. We received $25,000 about a month ago from the county in our very first assessment check. And we are currently finalizing a reimbursement policy. We are working through with our legal team, our accounting team, and our auditing team to ensure that our reimbursement process can stand to the public scrutiny and also to our annual audits. It's interesting in researching the different urban renewal agencies within the state that some have processes and some do not. So we're just trying to make sure that we have all of our T's crossed and I's dotted before we approve this. But I anticipate our very first reimbursement within the next 60 days.
Awesome. Any questions? Okay. If there's no further questions, that is our agenda. Is there anything further by either council or MDC board? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn? I have a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All ayes. Mr. Winder, do you want to ask for a motion to close as well, this special meeting?
Sure, Madam Mayor, I move that we close this.
Chair, I move we close the meeting.
I ask for a motion.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Now you just say,
For
ask
our
for a vote, yeah.
Okay, so now it's our turn for a,
You already got a motion and a second.
okay, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.
Okay.
Sorry, I wasn't paying attention.
Threw everybody off.
Now to the back room to get the rest of this done. All right.